right, welcome to another episode of TRG Talks Trade. I am your host, Meredith Lambert, and today we are joined by Rachel Bauman, our underwriting and claims manager here at Trade Risk Guarantee. So on today's episode, we are going to talk about the importance of declaring the right currency on your entries. And, that might seem or sound pretty obvious, especially to all of us that deal with entries every day, but you never know. Sometimes something happens and slips through the cracks. So we wanted to kind of talk about a recent example Rachel experienced on this. So I guess to kind of get us started, Rachel, what was it that you kind of saw? Like just kind of start with the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so we noticed that one of our importers, their bond sufficiency went over 100% when they've never even been in the range of going over capacity. And so in looking at their report, I noticed that one of their recent entries, the value and duties, taxes, and fees on that entry were really inflated compared to all of their other entries that they usually make, which to me made that stand out in my mind as kind of an anomaly, something uncommon in their importing practices. So I reached out to the importer and let them know that that's what I was seeing. And with that information, they went to their broker. And what it turned out being was the broker had declared the wrong currency. It was supposed to be in US dollars, and they didn't convert it from the Japanese yen that it was in
Mm,
on the invoice. And so that made the value artificially inflated, and therefore the duties, taxes, and fees were artificially inflated as well.
right. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, especially nowadays with these potential tariffs coming, the
Mhm.
declaration of value becomes even more important when you're paying a 25%
Mhm.
tariff as opposed to a maybe 2% or
Yep.
whatever it was
Yep.
before. Yeah. So how did we at TRG, how were we prompted to take that deeper look? You kind of mentioned the sufficiency project.
Yeah, yep. So we have a program that runs on all of the bonds we hold. And anytime one of those bonds goes over 80% of the capacity, it sets an alert to essentially me to look at that account and see what might be going on there. And so it was that project that prompted me to look closer into the account. And in this situation, they weren't actually really over capacity. Once the broker fixed that entry, then they were back down in the normal range.
Okay.
But it worked in the sense that it alerted us to that entry and what could potentially be going on there.
Right. Okay. And then we were able to alert
Mhm,
them and then
mhm,
their broker. So when the broker was fixing that entry, were they able just to fix the entry
mhm.
before it kind of hit, or did they have to do a post summary correction or
They
anything
yeah,
like that?
they had to correct the 7501, the entry summary, and then customs accepted that, and within 24 hours, it was reflecting what it actually should have been.
Okay. I know
Mhm,
sometimes when importers, they have to file a lot of post summary corrections, they will then in turn see maybe a liquidated damage or some
mhm,
other kind of claim come up from the fact that they
mhm.
themselves kind of told on themselves. Seems counterintuitive, but I know that sometimes happens. Would this be that kind of situation? Like, would this
I don't
importer see
think
something like
so.
that?
I think
Mhm.
with this one, it was caught early enough that the correction just resolved the issue.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So definitely an example of why you would want to be able to double check your entries pretty
Absolutely.
regularly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean,
And
I
it's
know a
not
lot of times it's clockwork. It's like clockwork. You just know it's happening and then something like this happens. So
yeah,
always want to be able to look over things.
exactly. And
Yeah.
it's not something we see very often, but that tends to be when you see an entry like that that's so far out of the norm, that's
Mhm.
usually what it is. It's something with the currency exchange.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that is really fascinating. Um, a really good example of kind of double checking something that you think, I mean, again, I almost felt like making this video and telling this story. I was like, oh, that should be obvious,
Mhm.
obviously
Mhm.
use the correct currency on your 7501. But, sometimes these things happen and a little mistake turns
Mhm.
into, or ends up having big
Right.
ramifications once
Right.
it,
And
yeah.
customs isn't going to check to make sure that you entered the right currency. And
Yeah.
so the next if we hadn't caught that and it stayed on the entry history, there's a potential that customs could have required that bond to be increased, even though it didn't necessarily need to be.
Wow. Yeah, which
Mhm.
just continues to spiral,
Yeah.
one thing after another.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that story. Is there anything else you kind of, I mean, we like to do these, kind of keep them short,
Mhm.
little real world examples of things within trade.
Mhm.
Anything else on that story you kind of want to highlight?
Not necessarily. I think it's a really good example of how internal processes at TRG are in place to help importers. And it's not
Mhm.
necessarily just to tell you, hey, you need to increase your bond, but to catch things like that.
Absolutely. And I mean,
Mhm.
shameless plug, obviously, we have our Eagle Eye Ace reporting,
Yeah,
where if you sign
exactly.
up for that, then you are also able to monitor those entries as they're coming in through customs eyes. I always kind of like to explain it as, your broker is inputting data, they're putting data into custom system, so to speak, they're transmitting to customs, whereas the data that we're getting is coming from customs.
Mhm.
So anything you see there is what customs has on file, it's what
Yeah,
they have filled out, it's what they've put in. So just, increase transparency overall into your entries, to see things like this. And one of the reports obviously is our bond efficiency report. So at TRG, if you have your bond with TRG, we're going to monitor your bond. But then if you also sign up for Eagle Eye Ace, then you're able to look at that bond on
mhm.
a daily basis whenever you want, basically.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, well, thanks again for a great and really interesting story. We hope to do a lot more of these in the coming, really over the course of this year. I know Rachel and a lot of our other TRG staff have some really great kind of niche stories of just things that they've seen across. I mean, we work with so many importers. Of course, we encounter some kind of interesting little anomalies. So, all
Absolutely. Yeah.
right. Well, thanks again, Rachel, and we'll talk to you all very soon.